this is the candidate forum regarding the future of voting rights in Wisconsin. I am Brianna Stanley. I am the regional organizing lead for Western Wisconsin Human Rights Campaign, one of the co-sponsors, along with Chippewa Valley Votes. If you guys aren't familiar with the Human Rights Campaign, we are the largest LGBTQ civil rights organization in the country. We are currently 3 million strong and counting. I'm actually part of the Emerson Rising program, so we are here, my colleagues and I throughout the state, fighting to get pro-equality candidates elected in the midterm elections, as well as fighting for the advocacy and protections of all LGBTQ and marginalized people in the state. That is one of the biggest reasons why I figured that co-sponsoring this election, or this forum, is very important to us, because one of the biggest struggles for marginalized people in our state is voting. The current state of our voting rights and the voter ID laws is causing marginalized individuals to not be able to vote. And that is why the Human Rights Campaign strongly supports automatic voter registration. So that's kind of why the Human Rights Campaign is here and co-sponsoring this, because it is important. We are intersectional in our work. There is LGBTQ people in all walks of life. There's LGBTQ women, people of color, people in the military, and all religions. So a fight for one is, of course, a fight for all, and that's what we're here for. So yeah, and then just a little plug. We are looking for volunteers this election season, so you can come visit me at my table over there if you want to talk about that. I'm going to quickly go over our agenda. You guys have it, and what we are going to do today, or tonight. So after I'm done here, Bill Hogseth is going to come up here and discuss the overview of automatic voter registration and voting rights that are currently in Wisconsin. And he's also going to introduce our moderator, Dr. Salika Duxworth-Lawton. And then from there, we're going to get our panelists up here and discuss our forum etiquette, because that's important for us to all know how this is going to go. Our candidates will be doing a 3-minute opening statement, so they'll each get 3 minutes to do their openings. And from there on, we'll go on to a 90-minute question and answer. We do have 5, I believe, questions that were submitted by the public that they will go down and answer. And then at the end of that, we will be opening the mic to the floor for you guys to ask questions for our candidates. After the 90 minutes, all of our candidates will get 3 minutes to close their statements, from which then we will adjourn, and we'll have a lovely meet and greet out in the lobby. You can talk to the candidates, you can talk to Chippewa Valley Votes, get registered to vote. We do have that option here, which is really important. You can go sign up to volunteer with the Human Rights Campaign, and yeah, learn more about automatic voting registration in the back. So yeah, I'll have Bill come up here and give you guys a little overview of voting rights.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Hogseth. Many of you know me. It's good to see you all here tonight. Thanks for coming. I'm going to take the next 20 minutes and try to set a framework for the discussion we're going to have tonight with the candidates who are here. And talking about voting, hoping to have a good conversation, looking into the future about how we can expand voting rights for folks in Wisconsin. And I want to start just by saying a little bit about myself and why, what's called me to this work over the last year, working with voters and working on voting rights issues. And I first stepped into a voting booth when I was 8 years old. My dad took me to vote with him in 1988 presidential election. It was at Putnam Heights Elementary School, about a mile from here. And we walked through the doors of the gymnasium, across the basketball floor, over to the table where the little ladies, pardon my French, were with the poll books, where my dad gave them his name. They gave him his number, and we walked over to the voting booth, which was under the basketball hoops, with the little striped red, white, and blue curtains. And my dad parted the curtains, and we walked into the booth. And it felt like this really special private place in there with my dad, and I was, up to his hips. And I remember looking up at him. It was those old voting machines with the levers, and he would doosh, and he'd pull on the lever and make this big mechanical thud, and it just felt really important. watching my dad do that, and I remember feeling like this was a really special thing, like it was like a ritual, something that not only my dad, but everybody else in the country was doing that day. So that experience really imparted to me the value of voting, and to this day I still don't know who my dad voted for, because he told me that didn't matter. What mattered was me and the decision that I made inside that booth, because it was my decision. But what I didn't know then, that I do know now as an adult, as I've learned more about this stuff, is that getting inside of that voting booth is not as easy as I thought it was as a kid. And that the access into that voting booth is problematic for a lot of groups in the country. And it's actually that little space inside the voting booth, turns out if you look at the history of America, is somewhat of a battleground. So if you look around here tonight, look at the person sitting next to you. If that person is not a rich white man, at the time of the founding of our country, that person would not have had the right to vote. So in 1789, when the Constitution was first ratified, 6% of Americans were eligible to vote. That's 6 in 100. And that wasn't by accident. The question of who could and could not vote was one of the most hotly debated topics of the Constitutional Convention, because the founders understood that voting meant real political power. So John Adams, I have a quote from him during that debate. He said it best. "It's dangerous to open up such a controversy as would be opened by attempting to change the qualifications of voters. There will be no end of it. New claims will arise. Women will demand a vote. Boys from 12 to 21 will think their rights not enough attended to. And every man who has not a dime, in other words, the poor, will demand an equal voice with any other in all acts of the state. Voting tends to confound and destroy all distinctions and surrender all ranks to one common level," as if that's a bad thing. And so that's where the story of our nation begins, and it's not something that I'm proud of. It doesn't really make us feel good, but luckily it's not where our story ends. Because the rest of the story is a story about folks getting together and working to expand access to the ballot box and expand access into the voting booth. And it's a pretty amazing story. And so it was in 1870 when the 15th Amendment was passed, when black men, but not women, could vote. Which ironically, at the passage of the 15th Amendment, it triggered a brutal backlash in the southern states in the form of Jim Crow, segregation, poll taxes, literacy tests, violence, and outright murder, all designed to eliminate the black vote. And then it took 70 years of tireless organizing, starting with the Seneca Falls Declaration, heading all the way to the women's suffragist movement, and what we know of as the first Women's March, which was the day before Woodrow Wilson's inauguration in 1913, when the suffragists marched down Pennsylvania Avenue on horseback in white, while men spit upon them, jeered at them, threw glass bottles at them, and sent many of them to the hospital. But the 19th Amendment was passed, and women were enfranchised with the right to vote. And the story continues all the way to the Civil Rights Movement, when Dr. King said, "Give us the ballot," in one of his famous speeches, because he understood that voting is the ultimate tool for nonviolent change. And the promise of the 15th Amendment hadn't been realized. It was being suffocated by Jim Crow laws, by the Klan, by white supremacist judges, and by local county clerks, who were imposing impossible voter registration tests, like guess the number of jelly beans in this jar, or recite all 67 judges in every Alabama county in order to get registered. And so it took years of struggle, years of marching, years of organizing in places like Selma, to finally pass the Voting Rights Act, which opened the door to millions of new voters. And when that law was signed into law, you had Rosa Parks, you had John Lewis, and you had Martin Luther King standing behind Lyndon Baines Johnson in that room. And then also don't forget, it wasn't until 1971 that 18-year-olds could vote. And that wasn't just a gift from the Congress, that was due to immense public pressure, because it had become unacceptable to send young people to war and draft them and send them overseas without giving them the right to cast a ballot. And it was the 26th Amendment that changed that. And so that's why we're here tonight, because a lot of people have struggled and a lot of people have sacrificed in order to have this right to vote, which I think is sacred. And so we know that the right to vote is cherished, it's worth defending, and we shouldn't take it for granted. And I want to take a little bit of time to say that this story includes groups like Chippewa Valley Votes. And I just want to celebrate the work that Chippewa Valley Votes has done. We're an all-volunteer organization. We have no paid staff. We've operated on a budget of less than $1,000. And in this year alone, we have interacted face-to-face, one-to-one, and helped more than 2,667 voters this year. So that's through... So that's voter registration, that's helping voters with get an ID, that's answering questions about where to go for the polls, making sure they know what's up. So I'm really proud of that, and just want to ask everybody who has registered a voter through Chippewa Valley Votes, attended a meeting, donated money, whatever, just to raise your hand. So last May, a group of us got together from Chippewa Valley Votes, and we sat in the basement of Grace Lutheran Church here in Eau Claire, and we asked ourselves what it would look like to go one step beyond just registering voters and just helping voters. What would it look like if we actually started to tinker with the structure that's holding voters back unfairly out of the ballot box? So we started the meeting with a potluck. We passed some dishes around, we ate, we shared a meal, we had some dessert, then we cleared away our tables and we started talking strategy. And we had a lot of ideas. We threw them up on a piece of paper with colored markers. And the idea that we landed on in May was the idea of automatic voter registration. And this is just a simple law that in one fell swoop can register hundreds of thousands of new voters in Wisconsin. And we landed on that, and then we started talking about what would it look like for us to actually bring this law into the conversation during this election cycle. And this forum is one of the methods we've used to bring automatic voter registration into the public eye and to try to elevate it as an important priority today. So a month later, what we did was we invited 45 candidates from all the parties running for state office, assembly, senate, and governor. We invited them to sign a pledge that they would support automatic voter registration in Wisconsin, and we were thrilled when 17 candidates signed that pledge from Republicans, Democrats, Green Party, and Independents. And tonight we've got candidates here. 8 candidates who've taken the time out of their very busy campaign schedules to join us and have a conversation about what it would look like to look into the future and expand voting rights in Wisconsin and make sure that Wisconsin elections are more fair, more inclusive, and more representative. So I thank you for coming here, and thank you for showing a public commitment to making sure everybody has the right to vote. And in some ways, it's kind of sad that we have to have this conversation, but nonetheless we do, because the average voter in the state's losing ground. So if you're an average voter in Wisconsin and you want to cast a ballot, you have to navigate a unique set of hurdles, and you have to jump through a unique set of hoops before you can vote. And the first thing you have to do if you're a voter is you have to register, which may sound very simple, but to some it's really complex. And it actually turns out to be a maze. And our volunteers at Chippewa Valley Votes know that firsthand. We've seen the look on people's faces when they hit a barrier, when the rules don't make sense or they don't have the exact paperwork that they need. And we've seen this look on people's faces in the lobbies of food pantries out here in Chippewa Valley Technical College, in classrooms and high schools. And so it shouldn't be a surprise that more than 1.2 million Wisconsin residents, citizens, are not registered to vote. That's 3 in 10 Wisconsinites, which is not acceptable. And that's because the way we register voters here in Wisconsin is totally out of date. We place the burden on the voter to provide the paperwork and to jump through the hoops rather than the other way around. And what's even worse is that once you are registered, it's hard to stay registered. Wisconsin is known for, and other states as well, for carrying out voter purges. So last November, the Wisconsin Elections Commission sent 340,000 postcards out across the state to voters who they believe had moved. And for those voters who did not return the postcards, they were eliminated from the voting rolls. Now, voters who, the next election, which was the February primary, came to cast their ballot, more than 7,000 voters who attempted to vote in that February election were wrongfully purged. And the Wisconsin Elections Commission, to their credit, admitted that. And so that's why we need automatic voter registration. When someone applies for their driver's license, when they register for a college class, when they buy a fishing license from the DNR, register them to vote. You're giving your name, your date of birth, your address, and a signature on file to a state agency. State agencies need to do a better job just sharing that information. And in one fell swoop, again, hundreds of thousands of new voters instantly in the system. Voters like volunteers like us don't have to work as hard with a law like that in place, because, I mean, actually there's other things that we could do. And then just to put this into life, the cost of mailing 340,000 postcards to people that the Wisconsin Elections Commission believed had moved was about $95,000. It cost the Wisconsin Elections Commission 28 cents per postcard. $95,000 to carry out that purge. The cost of implementing automatic voter registration for one-time costs, according to the Legislative Fiscal Bureau, $23,000. So this law not only makes sense from a voter perspective, an assistance perspective, but also from an economic perspective. So once the voters register, they get to head to the polls. But they'll need a photo ID to do that. And that might not sound like a big deal, but it is to some. If you just moved in from out of state, if you're an out-of-state student, and you don't want to switch your license to Wisconsin, if you don't drive, if you use the bus for transportation, getting a photo ID isn't as easy as you might think it is. And also, when it comes to getting a photo ID, accessibility to the DMV becomes a barrier. Because who likes going to the DMV? No hands? Okay. But not only that, not only is the DMV a terrible place to visit, but also DMVs are rarely open during times that are convenient for working people. So every DMV in the city of Milwaukee opens up at 8 a.m. and it closes at 4:30 p.m. Terrible for working people. And there's very few of them on public transit lines. They're not open during the weekends or the evenings. And then for rural voters, access to the DMV is also difficult. The DMV in Minocqua is open on the first Tuesday in January, April, July, and October. In other words, 4 days a year. So if you're a rural voter and you need to get a photo ID, 4 days a year. So when Wisconsin's photo ID law was passed, it was quickly swept into the courts, and a federal judge estimated that 300,000 Wisconsin residents lacked the ID necessary to cast a ballot. So it should come as no surprise that the 2016 presidential elections saw the lowest voter turnout in the state in 20 years. And yeah, I think that was by design. Many of the lowest turnout was in neighborhoods in Milwaukee. And it's often said that voter impersonation is the reason that we need these laws. That we need to safeguard against voter fraud. And if that was true, that'd be fine, but comprehensive studies have found that only 31 cases of voter impersonation have been found for 1 billion votes that have been cast. 31 out of 1 billion votes cast there's been detected voter impersonation. So these laws really are a solution without a problem, and certainly they've disenfranchised more people than cases of voter fraud that they've prevented. And then lastly, once the voter is registered, has their ID, and it's time to cast their ballot, they may find that they're casting their ballot in a district that's been engineered politically, so that to tilt the advantage towards one political party or another. And that those boundary lines have been manipulated such that the voter's power has been diluted because their district that they're casting a vote in has been cracked such that like-minded voters have been deliberately spread across multiple districts. Or maybe their district has been packed, where like-minded voters have been concentrated together in a single district to reduce their voting power in other districts. Either way, the end result is a strategy that's denying voters fair representation. And so we see this playing out in Wisconsin in statewide races. These are often competitive races for a governor, for Senate, US Senate. They're usually decided by only a few percentage points. But contrast that to races with the current state assembly map. In 2012, one party won 60 of the 99 seats in the Wisconsin Assembly, despite winning only 48.6% of the statewide vote. And then in 2014, that same party won 63 seats with only 52% of the statewide vote. And that's because ours is a state in which the lawmakers have the ability to draw the election maps. And they can slice and dice blocks of like-minded voters, and they can use data-based mapping tools that can identify precise areas in a neighborhood or a block or a township that they would like to include or exclude based on the voting histories of those areas. In other words, lawmakers are choosing the voters, not the other way around. But it doesn't have to be that way. Other states like Iowa, the election maps are created by independent, nonpartisan boards. They follow very simple rules, like you have to follow a county line, or districts have to be regularly shaped, like squares and rectangles, rather than salamanders and unicorns. So it doesn't have to be this way. We can do better, and we will do better, and I'm pretty optimistic, actually, despite that things seem pretty bleak. I'm hopeful because I look back on the history and I see stories of citizens organizing together, rising up into movements, demanding access to the ballot box. That gives me hope. I'm given hope by the fact that 13 states have adopted automatic voter registration. 20 more have introduced that legislation in their state houses. I am given hope by the fact that Florida is on the verge of restoring rights to 1.4 million individuals who have a past felony conviction. I'm hopeful because we have candidates here who have made a visible stand for every citizen's right to step into that voting booth, and I'm hopeful because of grassroots groups like Chippewa Valley Votes who are working their tails off to make sure people can get into that voting booth, and I'm hopeful because everybody in this room, you're all engaged. So I'm looking forward to a great conversation tonight. I'm hoping that this might be the beginning of a new movement in Wisconsin in the tradition of the movements before us. And just imagine what it would look like if we all got together and we kept pushing and pushing and pushing in the ways that the suffragists did, or in the ways that the civil rights movement did, and built a culture where it was easier, not harder to vote. What if we rigged the system in the opposite way, such that it favored voters? What if we demanded Election Day as a national holiday? What if we demanded automatic voter registration? What if we demanded that election maps aren't politically engineered? Could we start approaching 80 or 90% voter turnout and return political power squarely to the hands of the voters? What kind of world would we live in then? What kind of laws would we have? And what kind of lives would people be living? So, my hope is if you are moved by tonight's discussion, I encourage you to take action. I know many of you already do, and thank you for that. One thing you can do is there's a pile of petitions, blank petitions, over where Lindsay is standing right now. If you'd like to help us circulate petitions for automatic voter registration, take a few blank ones with you tonight and have your friends and family sign them. Use that as a starting point to have a conversation about what is automatic voter registration, why does it make sense? Because nothing comes without a demand. And with that, I'm going to hand the floor over to my friend Salika Ducksworth-Lawton. She's a professor of history at UW-Eau Claire. She's on the board of the Wisconsin chapter of the ACLU. She's the organizer of Eau Claire's Martin Luther King Jr. Day and our Juneteenth observation. And she's awesome. And everything she does, she's building bridges. And she's encouraging dialogue and people talking to each other and finding solutions to the world we're living in. So give it up for Salika.
I want to thank you for that wonderful survey. To point out to you that I'm a native of Louisiana, which was in 1960, 43% black. I was 20 miles from the Mississippi border, which was 67% black. And in both states in 1960, less than 5% of the black population could vote. In 1970, 5 years after the Voting Rights Act, less than 20% of the blacks in both states were registered to vote. So while the Voting Rights Act was a great advancement, we still have a long way to go. And our goal tonight is to have a forward-looking conversation that crosses boundaries and crosses divides. It is to have a conversation that crosses race, that crosses gender, that crosses sexuality, that crosses partisanship, because ultimately it is in all of our best interests, no matter where you stand, to have more participation in this democracy. I'm a military historian, but my specialty is race and national security. When people feel disenfranchised and when they feel that they have no voice, they create havoc in the country. We don't want that, do we? So to make sure that people are enfranchised, to have that forward-looking conversation, I think, is one of the most important things we can do as citizens in this country. We find consensus through conflict, we find consensus across difference. And this is a part of that process of hopefully maybe finding some interesting and new solutions. I'd like to call the names of the participating candidates and ask that you take your seat as I call your name. John Calabrese, Assembly District 29. Aaron Camacho, District 31. Jodi Emerson, Assembly District 91. Wendy Sue Johnson, Assembly District 68. Wren Keturi, Assembly District 67. Jeff Smith, Senate District 31. Maggie Turnbull, Wisconsin Governor. And Charlie Warner, Assembly District 93. Let us welcome the candidates. We have 3 questions that have come in from online, and I know that these people are here in the audience. Nick Novak is here. Can we get a microphone to Mr. Novak? Where's the microphone?
Right here.
Right here. And have you asked your question? Oh, wait, let me stop. I'm sorry, I'm supposed to give you your 3 minutes to introduce yourselves. I am sorry. I am sorry, who am I? So let's start with the order that I called you, and then Mr. Novak will get to you. John Calabrese, please. Should be on.
How about now? Oh,
Yeah.
nice. My name's John Calabrese. I live over in Menominee, and I'm a woodworker. Do some construction work. I've been volunteering for about 5 or 6 years in the pursuit of getting money out of politics, and I haven't been successful. But I learned a lot about how things work or don't work in medicine, and I'm giving this a shot. Running in the Assembly District. District is Menominee, New Richmond, and all points in between. And I'm really glad to be here, and I thank Bill and the doctor here. It's I know Bill detailed it really well, but it's an ongoing struggle that it's fascinating to learn, and it's fascinating to live in these times to see how it continues. And when I'm out knocking on doors, as I've been pretty frequently for the last few weeks, you know, a lot of people who aren't in my political party don't share the same views as I do, but I would love for all of them to vote and to have a voice, and so many people get discouraged by the process. And I know Bill talked about the Voting Rights Act, and in 2013 a big chunk of it got repealed. And it was a big news for a little bit, but a lot of people don't realize how significant that was. And Justice Roberts said that day that we were a changed country, and that a 5-4 decision in a court that's not supposed to be partisan. And the very next day, I believe, Texas implemented some changes to their laws, and it spread to other states, including Wisconsin. And that's when the voter ID laws came in, and all sorts of other roadblocks to voting. And yes, all of us are running for office and doing it for personal reasons and for reasons to support our communities, but it's also an honor to just be, at the same time, spreading the word about what people like Chippewa Valley Votes are doing, and a lot of other good groups who are dedicating their time. And while voting is super important. It's also important to keep the movements going in the street in between elections, because that's the real way that things get done, and those movements end up being above the politicians and above the Supreme Court, and so I'm just glad to be here.
Thank you. Erin Camacho.
Hi there, thank you for having me. As you heard, my name is Erin Camacho, and I'm running for Senate in District 31. And I'm really grateful to have been invited to this forum as a third-party candidate, Green Party candidate. Oftentimes, a diversity of perspectives are hindered from being at the table and being a part of the political discourse. Beyond that, the topic tonight is particularly important for me. As you can tell by my name plaque, my name is not traditionally spelled in the female version. It's actually A-A-R-O-N, and my mother, being brought up in the 60s and 70s, knew how important it was for me not to be judged on paper as a female. And now with voter ID laws, it's kind of backfired a little bit. I have to prove who I am because my name doesn't match up with the perception of the workers at the voting polls. And I know for many demographics, besides myself as a minority woman, an indigenous woman, that can be a struggle. So the chance to talk about this particular issue and bring that dialogue to the forefront is an opportunity, I think, our district, whether it's for Senate or for Assembly, it's really important. If you don't know much about me, I've lived in the area for about 6 years. I live in Buffalo County. My husband and I, my partner, we've been together for about 14 years. We just celebrated our anniversary on the 4th, so I'm really excited about that. Looking forward to the next 14. But we've also come into some issues with voting because of who we are. When you're new to a community, particularly a close-knit community, I've never been anywhere where we had to bring our deed to the voting poll. But my husband was forced to bring his deed to the voting poll when we first bought our home here. And so I'd really like whoever gets into office, no matter at what level, to really be advantageous in their advocacy to voter rights and access to the polls. Access meaning varying abilities, as well as eliminating discriminations for demographics that exist in our state. I have a degree in legal studies. I have a bachelor's degree. I just completed that, and my intention is going to law school. But before then, I have a chance to serve my community. And as the previous speaker said, this is an honor. This is an opportunity to serve, and I look forward to that, whether I get hired for state senate or not. My advocacy will continue, and my fellow candidates will see me in their offices. But I hope that people will really vote beyond party lines this election, because we have to remember the political duopoly that has put us in the position that we are at. That is why I'm running green. I'm the only non-establishment candidate running for Senate in my district, and I am the only female. I am also defying age within the history of our district. I'm 33, but I have a lifetime of experiences. And so I look forward to bringing those experiences and the tools in my toolbox to the table and be an advocate for the people. Thank you.
Thank you. Jodi Emerson.
Hi, I'm Jodi Emerson, and I'm running for the 91st Assembly District. The 91st is the city of Eau Claire. I feel like I'm about the only candidate up here, other than Maggie, who's running for the statewide office, who doesn't need a map to describe our district. So, a lot of you guys, there's a lot of familiar faces in the audience, and so a lot of you know a little bit of my history. I'm a lifelong Eau Claire person. We've spent, both my husband and I have spent a lot of time just being invested in our community, whether it was as PTA when our kids were younger, or getting various volunteer activities. The last place that a lot of you know me from is my work with Fierce Freedom. It's a nonprofit that fights human trafficking. And I spent the last 5 years of my life being a voice for the voiceless, is really how we looked at that job. Part of it was raising public awareness, but we could only raise so much awareness with the laws that were on the books at the time. And so we didn't have the laws in Wisconsin that were going to support victims, that were going to catch the perpetrators. And so part of my responsibility, I felt, was getting those laws changed. And I was fortunate enough in 5 years to get 7 laws passed on a bipartisan level to strengthen our protections for the most vulnerable. And I really look at this voting rights issue as being there for the most vulnerable. being a voice for the voiceless again, whether it is people who maybe have a criminal past who don't have the ability to vote right now, whether it's marginalized communities like homeless or housing insecure people who maybe don't have the time and money to get an ID that regulates or shows where their new address is because they moved a month ago. Maybe they don't have a home at all. We should be looking at how can we get more voices heard, not how can we get fewer voices heard. And if you look at this table, it's filled with progressive candidates. The party of power is not here tonight. And I think that's really sad. I think they're happy with the power that they have and they don't want to give it up. They don't want more people to have a voice. I think that's one of the things that every single one of us up here at this table and in this room all have in common, is we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to have a voice and have that voice heard. So thank you for being here tonight, for pushing us as candidates to be a voice for the voiceless, and for doing what you guys do with the individual organizations that you're with. Thanks.
Thank you. Wendy Sue Johnson.
Hi there. I also could talk about voting rights for literally an hour, because I have, and some of you probably heard like the whole gerrymandering spiel, so I'll try not to get too long-winded. But like Bill, I actually remember some of my earliest memories of civic engagement were with my mom, picking up garbage on Locust Lane, and then going to Locust Lane Elementary in the gym, in that big metal booth, and she pulled the levers, but then she let me pull the big one to open up the curtains and register her, her votes. I don't know the exact year. I'm thinking it was when Jimmy Carter was elected, because I remember having that vote in class as well. And so that's, some of my earliest memories as well. And then I went on and taught high school social studies, and when I was teaching at the Eau Claire Academy, my classes were small enough, I actually would load them into the van. And if you know the Eau Claire Academy, it's a residential treatment center, and going to the polls was probably not really high on the list of things that the people there want to teach these kids, but I wanted to empower them, and so we would get in the van and we would go down to Main Street, because I was living on the East Hill at the time, and the nice poll worker would walk both my classes through it for real once and then for pretend once, so I would actually vote with my classes. I brought them down to the state capitol for the Supreme Court tour as well. Again, probably not the kind of the traditional class that would go on those Supreme Court visits, but it was great fun. I also taught at Altoona High School, where I couldn't load, all of those kids into a van and take them to vote. But, when I was thinking about what career I was going to do next, because, thank God for teachers, I, couldn't cut it as a teacher. I did it for almost 10 years, and it's just exhausting and stressful. And now I'm a divorce lawyer, and it's so much easier than teaching. And I'm actually not really kidding. So anyway, when I was figuring out what I wanted to do for my day job, I was also thinking I might want to run for office someday. And Jodi grew up here. My kids I think are 7th generation Chippewa Valley, 4th generation Eau Claire Public Schools. But I was the dance coach at Eau Claire North, and then I owned a dance studio after I taught. And who's going to take the dance coach seriously when she runs for office? So like a law degree would give me a little credibility to understand laws before I want to go down and write them. So that actually entered into my thinking when I went to law school. And then at the end of law school, I had like a year left. I'm on Christmas break, and there's only one declared candidate for 2 open seats on the school board. So, I sent out an email to the Parent Advisory Council. I think Jeff was already he was our chairperson before I was, but he was gone by then. I'm like, we need to run from someone for school board who was a parent. And it took literally 2 minutes for someone to say, yeah, it's you. And I was like, oh, you're right. So anyway, it's kind of been a long road, to get involved in civic engagement. But part of being a lawyer was I want to be able to use that credibility to fight the good fight. So when my partner and I opened a law firm 4 years ago, almost to the day, not long after that, Bill Whitford, this old retired law professor, calls up and says, hey, you don't know me, I'm a law professor, I'm going to send you this unpublished law review article about gerrymandering. And so packing and cracking and really weighty stuff, and I'm going to call you back in a few weeks and see what you think. And so he calls me back and he's like, do you want to be a plaintiff in this lawsuit? Nobody thinks we're going to get to trial, but darn it, we can't, give up. We have to continue to fight for this thing. And my husband's like, you'll alienate half the population in Eau Claire. You're going to declare yourself a Democrat. I'm like, if they care what their divorce lawyers' politics are, they probably already know. So thank you for your input. I'm going to do it anyway. And he hates it when I throw him under the bus, so to speak, these things, but he's not here, so. So anyway, I signed on because it's the right thing to do. And we went all the way to the Supreme Court. Nobody thought we would be there. It is not dead. We did not lose. We are going to go to trial in 2019. And we've added a bunch of plaintiffs, and we have a new plaintiff. And will you stand up and introduce you to another one of the 40 plaintiffs right from Dunn County. We have another Keller, who's not here, but he is another of the new plaintiffs as well. So we've expanded the plaintiffs to try to prove this thing. And so I guess what I want you to know is that voting rights is like why I went to law school.
Thank you. You owe somebody a minute, that's all right. Wren Keturi.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. So my name is Wren Keturi. I'm running in the 67th State Assembly District. And if you're not Jodi, you do need to explain where your district is. So my district is most of Chippewa County, and eastern Dunn County does not include Menominee or Halley. Chippewa Falls and north is usually what I say, and I live in Chippewa Falls. Say Chippewa if you live in Chippewa. So, I was thinking about and reflecting on why I feel strongly about this issue. And there are a couple of reasons, and I think one of the reasons I feel very strongly about this issue is my own personal history and family history with voting rights. So some time ago I decided to investigate what role a family member who was a police officer in Macomb, Mississippi in the 1960s played in restricting the right to vote for African Americans there. And unfortunately I found some very tragic behavior there, and I know Bill detailed a little bit of the work that the Civil Rights Movement did to try to get access to the ballot for African Americans. And one of the towns that one of those groups had to leave, SNCC was the group, they had to leave Macomb. They had to leave Macomb, Mississippi because it was so violent, right? So I think it's really important to reflect upon the role that, we sometimes still play or still carry with us when it comes to voting. And then I was reflecting on something happier, right, which is, I have this great newspaper article, and it's of my grandmother. She's referred to only as Mrs. Charles Funk, but she's leaving the polling station at 2:30 in the morning because she was a poll worker her entire life. And it was talking about a historically, tight election, and they were there late counting. And I reflect on that every time I go in to vote, because it's largely women who are in there working the polls. And I know, I don't know if I've ever met a male poll worker. I know certainly, Bill Hogseth, I know Bill, Wendy over there. But I just want to say that is invaluable work. So thank you so much for being a poll worker. I know it's a long day for most folks. So I decided to run because fundamentally I believe that your zip code doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. And yet, I don't know if you've seen recent data, especially from where I live, more than half of my community either struggle to meet basic needs or live in poverty. And unfortunately, poverty is very closely correlated with the rate that you vote, right? And also, your zip code should not determine whether or not your vote counts. And too often, when I'm out talking to voters, I hear, my vote is not going to count here, not in this district, right? So I want to change that. I don't think your zip code should matter. And I'm running to say that, no matter who you are, where you stand, where you come from, your voice matters in this process. And I'm hoping that at least some of us at this table are able to raise a little hell in Madison and make a difference. So thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you. Jeff Smith.
Thank you.
Those are red.
Great. Way to go, Wren. All right, I am running for the Senate District 31. The Senate District 31, I kind of, even though it's crazy borders like everything else, I've set 4 corners that people might recognize in the city of Eau Claire, over to the city of Prescott, down to Turnbull, over to Black River Falls. So it has parts of all of 7 counties. So it's a pretty large district. Outside of Eau Claire, it's very rural, just so you know. But I've been working hard at it. And I'll tell you how long I've been working hard at this. I've been working hard at this since 2004, first time I ran for partisan office. Before that, I was a town chair. Before that, I was just a volunteer community leader. I founded the Parent Advisory Council in the school district of Eau Claire because I care about, and I learned to care, I should say, because I became a volunteer, about others and the plight of others. I feel like once I started volunteering in schools for my own kids, I realized how privileged I really am, what a great life I've had. Because I grew up in the city of Eau Claire and I've lived around here all my life. I've run a small business, you know, things have always gone well for me. And realized that that's not what it's all about. And it isn't even all about my own children, even though I do this because of the future for my children. It's about the future for everyone. And when I first ran, I ran on 2 issues. School funding reform and campaign finance reform. And I remember them always telling me, oh, Jeff, you can't talk about campaign finance reform because nobody understands it. You know, they might have been right about not understanding it, but it only took me about 30 seconds at a door to tell people how cheap it would be for them to help us pay for public funding of campaigns, and we'd have clean elections. And not a single person over the years, and this is my 7th campaign, have I ever had anybody say, oh no, I don't want to do that. This works, and people are starting to finally catch on. So when I did win election in 2006, and then a re-election in 2008 to the State Assembly, I became chairman of elections and campaign reform, because that really is where I think is the most necessary place to be if we're going to present a future for our democracy and for our children, beyond just what's happening from budget to budget or from election to election. We've got to be thinking long term. So in that term that I was chair of elections and campaign reform, my leadership of the Democratic Party liked the idea that I wanted to rewrite election law to the point of including automatic voter registration. So as far back as 2009 and 10, this is not necessarily a new idea. This is something that I had written into a bill, 72 pages of work right here. It's embedded in there along with a lot of other good things to make it easier for people to vote and make sure people do vote and are protected. We called it the Voter Protection Act. But my leadership was so sold on the idea all the way up to actually the Obama administration was lending help. They gave me not only my staff to work on that, but staff from other offices to work on this bill. We spent months on it. But yet, we had a slim margin in the Assembly and in the Senate back then, and things were starting to really tilt against us. The Tea Party was really charging up against us, and we lost a handful of votes, and we could not get it passed. I'm ready to reintroduce this and revise this to make sure that it is, of course, we have so many more things to get back into our voting rights, and introduce this again next year, almost immediately or as fast as we can, because this is such an important issue. All of these issues are important. I feel myself, in fact, to be a poster child of gerrymandering because I was gerrymandered out of a district that I used to win. You know, I won 60% of the vote in 2008, but now can't win that 93rd Assembly, haven't been able to win that 93rd Assembly district until Charlie wins it this year. But I have an opportunity to fill those shoes that Kathleen Weinhaut currently has as seat and to come into this state Senate and make things happen. At 63 years old, I don't need a new career. I don't need a title. I need a future for my family and my kids and for all of our children, and I know that that's why you're all here, and I want to thank you all for being here because you care enough, just like I do, to make these things happen.
Thank you. Maggie Turnbull.
Hello, and thank you so much for holding this incredibly important event. I'm really happy to be here tonight. Just a little bit about who I am. I'm running as an independent for governor of the state of Wisconsin, and one of many reasons I really appreciate events like this is because, as you know, it's not the default that we would hear about candidates who aren't running under the banner of one of the two main parties, let alone actually get to know who they are and what they stand for. So I love events like this, and I have to say, I've been going to candidate forums throughout the summer and fall, and I've met most of the other candidates for governor. There's actually 6 of us that will be on the ballot, and there are 2 notable absences, I would say, at every single one of these forums that I have not had a chance to meet in person yet, but all of us have different viewpoints, and I really think it's worthwhile to take some time to get to know who we all are. So thanks for that. I'm originally from West Dallas, Wisconsin, and most of my family lives around the Milwaukee area. My dad, when I was little, my dad really wanted to go to medical school. There's no way we could have afforded that, but the National Health Service had a program at that time that would pay for you to go to medical school in exchange for going to an underserved area, which is exactly what he wanted to do anyway. So he went to the Medical College of Wisconsin, and then we moved and ended up in Antigo, Wisconsin. And he worked, and still actually works to this day, on the Stockbridge Reservation and the Burnhamwood Clinic and the Antigo Clinic, and now he's running the Hobby Home for the elderly, and is really concerned about healthcare and quality of life for older people, especially as our whole population ages. So they're still there, and I consider Antigo to be my hometown, one of my hometowns. I went to college at UW-Madison and majored in physics and astronomy. And after getting my bachelor's degree, I went to Arizona and did a PhD in astronomy and cell biology because I'm really interested in planets around other stars and life on other worlds. And you know, what else is out there besides what we have going on here? This is pretty amazing, actually, what we have going on this planet. And I would like to know about the rest of the universe, too. So anyway, after PhD, I went to Washington, D.C. and ended up in a position with the Space Telescope Science Institute, where we run the Hubble telescope from. And it was a fantastic job, and I quit almost immediately because I realized that I needed to live in my home state. This is my home, is where I want to be. Politically, I served on the city council in Antigo, Wisconsin when I came back. I was active in the community, started the Antigo's Farmers Market, which is celebrating its 10th year this year. I ended up living in Madison, again, because I'm harvesting collaborators from the UW, which is a wonderful resource. And I decided to run for governor because there are so many skills that come into my daily work life that involve trusting, forming teams of people who really know what they are doing, and trusting those people in order to work as an effective leader, and being inclusive, inviting people to the table with many diverse perspectives in order to get impossible things done. I need to stop talking. But as I'm sure I'll get more chances to say that I'm really especially excited about ranked choice voting and automatic voter registration. Thanks.
Thank you. Charlie Warner.
Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here. I think we're working.
I think it's going to be good. I think your mic's working.
All right, thank you. I'm Charlie Warner. A lot of people just call me Charlene if they knew me when I was younger. I became a Charlie publicly when I entered the real estate business at 21, and I wanted people to remember me. And everybody in the business was male, and I was the unusual female, you know, that lady with the guy's name. So it was a way to get more people back, and I'm hoping that will be the way to develop more votes. I am running in the 93rd district, Jeff's old district. He recruited me, and it is a challenge. When you look at the district, and I have a map, but I too have points. It touches Eau Claire. There's a map over there my husband's holding upside down. And you know, when I decided to run, I knew a lot of people don't know what district they're in, so I decided to squeeze it down, make it black, and use it as part of the logo. Well, you know, when you squeeze it down and do that, it looks like a machine gun. So a logo with values matter and it's a machine gun just didn't work. So I go from Altoona, Eau Claire, I touch them, I go down on Brackett and 53, and then I go straight over to Pepin on the river, on the Mississippi and on Lake Pepin, up to Prescott on the confluence between the Chippewa and the Mississippi, and then back to Eau Claire, except you take out Menominee, you take out River Falls, and you take out Eau Claire because you know they're hotbeds of liberal activity. Gerrymandering really means that if all the usual voters turn out, the Democrat doesn't have a chance to win. It's one reason why I'm here. One reason why I've been pushing for voting rights to be broadened forever, because when they tightened the voting restrictions in Wisconsin, it was a big straw on this camel's back. And I think all of us have seen so many things over the last few years that are sort of like the last straw. So that's how I became a candidate. I want to change things. I believe that it's the moral obligation of a candidate to speak on behalf of their public, to speak for the citizens, to ensure their health, safety, and happiness. I mean, we are a community, a state, and a country of by the people, for the people, of the people. And it hasn't been happening. The last decade in our area has been a corporate welfare buyout, and I'm tired of it. So that's why I'm running. I've been going to the polls since I was a little girl of 4. I held my mother's dress and followed her in. My parents were activists. My grandparents, my great-grandparents were activists in Wisconsin and Turnbull County. My great-grandmothers both fought for women's right to vote. The women's right to vote started in the 1830s. And the Civil War interfered and women were needed to take care of people. Everybody became a nurse then. And after the Civil War, everything was a little bit too brisk and things were going on. But women have been fighting for the vote for a long time. So has everybody. Finally, it happened not 100 years ago. Isn't it shocking to think that we haven't had the vote for over 100 years? I mean, they've had the vote in parts of Northern Europe since the early 1900s, but we got it in 1928 with the 19th Amendment. 98 years. What's going to happen in 2 years when we celebrate 100 years? Hallelujah, I hope things are changed. I'd like to see us having automatic voter registration. It's so easy. My husband and I moved to Arizona in 2000, and one of the first things we did before he started his job and I went looking to see what I was going to do in my next career was to go and take care of our vehicle registration, and thought we'd go register to vote. We were at the DMV in Tucson, which is like a 2-day wait. But what happened is with our vehicle registration, we could register to vote. In Arizona, one of the tougher, more conservative states in our country. And it was a little form they handed you, and you filled out if you were a Republican, a Democrat, an Independent, or a Green Party. I don't think there was a Green Party then, but it was kind of a shock to us. So it was an easy process. And the idea that we don't have automatic voter registration blows my mind. As Bill mentioned, we have 13 states have accepted that. Unfortunately, and that covers 30% of the population of our country. It started, of course, on the West Coast in Oregon and Washington, California. Vermont was one of the last states to enact voter registration. And Vermont, within 6 months, or no, Virginia, I'm sorry. My time is up. I've gone on. Virginia had 12,000 people enroll for voting within 6 months. That's a huge percentage because they only have a population of less than 700,000 people. Thank you, I'm glad to be here. I'm so happy you are too.
Mr. Novak's been waiting patiently. I ask you to give me 15 seconds more. I do want to draw your attention to the why do we vote boards on this side. Please, before you leave and when we're doing the meet and greet, please make sure to write on these and write why you vote, because we're collecting that information. So thank you. And now what you've been waiting for, the question and answer. Mr. Novak.
Checking the microphone here. Is it working?
Is that one not working?
I got something.
Can I see it?
It's flashing. I think the battery might be good. Can I see it? Sure. I've got a second. Need it, but so is Nick. Sorry.
Where did this one come from? She's coming.
All right, it works. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for giving a damn. To hell with all the wastrels and cowards who couldn't show up. Our current system of voting has failed. Most voters such as myself, do not belong to any political party. We lack the money and the machinery to defeat uninspiring establishment Democrats or Republicans. Election after election, a majority of eligible voters are lectured not to be spoilers, so we hold our noses and we vote for the lesser of evils, or we do not vote at all. What if, instead, Wisconsin led the nation in electoral reform by doing away with partisan primaries and implemented in their stead ranked choice voting? 2 questions. If elected to statewide office, would you propose legislation in support of ranked choice voting? 2, if you have concerns about ranked choice voting, what solutions might you propose to address low voter turnout in the Badger State?
Anybody want to take this one? I see Jeff and Aaron. Is it okay if I call you by your first names, or would you prefer your last names? Jeff and Aaron.
All right, so thanks, Nick. That is actually a proposal that I was toying with back when I was the chair of the committee, because I actually like the idea of ranked choice voting and doing away with primaries. It also opens up the door for people to be able to vote their conscience, and then, you know, even if your first choice doesn't come through, you know, you get to go through it. Minnesota has that in law, but has not been able to implement it properly. And I think in the Twin Cities they have actually been trying to use it, but it has been, unfortunately, it just hasn't somehow been able to, I don't know if it's the software or whatever it is, they have not developed properly to make it work, or maybe it's confusing to people, but I think we need to educate people on to how that can work, because I do think that would actually open up for a lot more potential candidates to be able to step up, and or for voters to be able to vote their conscience and not feel like they're throwing their vote away. I think that's important. Anyway, so thank you for asking that question.
Aaron?
Thank you, and I echo the previous speaker. Ranked choice voting would provide a more equitable platform for our voices to be heard in the ballot box, and you'll see within my entire campaign, equitable is a term I use repeatedly. Fair is not enough. Progressive is not enough. We need equitable outcomes, whether it be with our voting, whether it be with our political approach, because we're not one party or another. When we're up here at the table, we're here for everyone. I'm not an enemy of anyone at this table, right? And so when we think about that, what's the best outcome for everyone, no matter the political line that you stand with? Ranked choice voting is an advantageous solution to some of the struggles that we have. But as you've seen, sometimes with the way that our legislature is stacked, it could be difficult. And so you can't go into office with one solution. So another solution you can bring to the table is to, for the time being, bring in runoff elections, right, for chief executive offices. I belong to a tribal nation. I am Prairie Band Potawatomi, and our nation is in Kansas. I live in Wisconsin. And one way that they enfranchise me as a voter is not only mail ballots, but also the ability to participate in runoff elections. The other thing we need to consider is restoring full citizenship rights to felons when it comes to voting, right? We talk about disenfranchisement, low voter turnout. That is one solution. We see that also we need to establish independent and transparent, nonpartisan redistricting processes. If we can't get if we can't get ranked choice voting, we need to find an alternative, and we do not have the latitude to wait. We don't have the latitude to wait. Our legacy depends on it as Wisconsin. We have been known for leading the nation in changes that bring about a more equitable platform to our communities, whether that be with the environment, whether that be within our political discourse. Former Senator, later former Governor Gaylord Nelson said that the government, the power of the government, needs to be placed in the hands of the ordinary people. We are the ordinary people. That's who we are. That's what we need to fight for. And if ranked choice voting isn't a solution, that's something that we can do quickly. We will find an alternative, and it's going to be interdisciplinary method needed because, as I said before, the binary discourse that we have currently going on is unhealthy, unsustainable, and we deserve better. Thank you.
I saw two more. Would it be Maggie and then Jodi? And I thought, Charlie, you were looking interested in on all of this?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I too am I've never been registered with one of the two main parties in my, as a voter, I've voted for people under all different banners. But I first heard of ranked choice voting when Ralph Nader was running against George W. Bush, and it just struck me back then as the solution to our problems. I mean, it really gets to the heart of things. And so I was a few days ago, I was at Wisconsin Public Television, and I recorded a candidate statement. They asked for all the statewide candidates to record a 4-minute statement. And I devoted about half of that to ranked choice voting and automatic voter registration. And I'm not going to read that whole thing, but I wanted to share with you just a little like the take-home point for me as a candidate for governor. So I said that as governor of the state of Wisconsin, my first executive order will be issued on January 7th, 2019, creating the Governor's Commission on Election Procedures to draft an elections repair bill, implementing ranked choice voting and automatic voter registration for all U.S. citizens living in Wisconsin. Within my first 100 days in office, I will call a special legislative session to act upon the elections repair bill and make these changes real. So this is definitely, if I accomplished absolutely nothing else in 4 years, that would be a legacy for the voters of Wisconsin to actually get a handle on their own government again and begin solving, whether it's roads, education and schools, healthcare, all of that requires a government that's capable of operating across the board so that we're not in this continual pendulum undoing what the last legislature did.
Jodi.
I'm definitely intrigued by this. This isn't something that was talked about, at least in the wide open public, several years ago, and it really has become a mainstream point of discussion. I would lean towards supporting it. I do worry about confusing voters even more and maybe getting people to the point that they're like, well, I don't really understand how this works, so I'm just not going to vote. So maybe, and I'm just kind of throwing this off the top of my head, maybe a way to start with it would be like in our partisan primaries. You know, I think there were several of us who were like, gosh, I would be happy with any of this chunk of governor candidates, especially when we had such a huge field as Democrats. You know, I would have been happy with 4 or 5 of them, but you had to choose one. So maybe that's kind of a half step to the system, because I really would worry about people just being so confused about what do I do and how do I do this, and maybe doing it with the partisan primaries, which I know doesn't completely get to the root of some of your concerns that you and I have had conversations about, Nick. But it might be a learning process for people, and it might mainstream it a little bit more, and then we could look at it further. But I'm definitely intrigued by it. I'm not opposed to it, but I do worry that people would just get too confused and not vote at all, and I think that's kind of the opposite of what we want, really. We want more people voting, not fewer.
Charlie, and then we have 2 more online questions before we open it up to the audience. Charlie?
I just wanted to say that I think I would be very much in favor of it. I would want to study it more because my concern is not unlike Jodi's. We have people that have gotten out of the habit or don't have any practice in being a part of the democracy. People have forgotten how to go to a meeting and vote and do that. We don't have the union halls. We don't have people joining clubs or being a part of that. So we have to go back and make people understand that they can be a part of a group that moves forward and does progress. So I think that doing anything that would scare them is bad, but this might give us a clearer path to our next leaders, and should cost a lot less.
The next question, Ms. Ferber. This is the one you want.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Ferber. I am a local advocate for justice reform here locally and statewide. And as many of you know, when a person is convicted of a felony and while they're serving their sentence, they're disenfranchised from voting. And this extends beyond just behind imprisonment walls, but also when a person is serving a probation or parole sentence. So my question for you is, if elected, would you support restoring voting rights to all citizens, including those that are serving a sentence for a felony conviction?
Start with Jodi.
Wren, then John, then Maggie.
Yes, absolutely. I don't believe that your right to vote is something that you should lose. Voting is not a privilege, it's a right. So yes, absolutely.
Yes, that's something I'm in favor of as well. I was out at a door of Menominee. It was at one of those areas that's not really rural, but just on a road leading out of the city, and I was knocking on a few doors there, and I came to one, and this fella came out, and I got about a couple sentences into my spiel, and he just kind of waved his hands, and he said, I can't vote. And he didn't get too in-depth in it, and all he said was, it was nothing violent, but I have a past that doesn't allow me to do it. He said, I had heard that because it happened in California that I could go back there and try it, but I am not going to be doing that. And then I proceeded to talk to him about a couple things, and it started with a discussion about his neighbors, and if he just basically knew that they were home. But then he pushed further about politics. He was one of the more measured and insightful people that I talked to, and for people who do what you do and who follow criminal justice reform and the often magic that happens when we actually look at incarcerated people and look at the system as a correction system instead of a punitive system. They might be some of the most insightful people to come out of there. And if you want to change the laws to, if the people decide that the time should be longer depending on the crime, whatever that may be, but when you serve the time, it should be done afterwards. It's a great way to enter back into society and lessen recidivism and let people be engaged, and I think it's a wonderful idea.
Yeah, absolutely, 1000%. I think the idea of stripping somebody's voting privileges or voting rights is outrageous. There's a lot of reasons why people might be in prison, and not everybody is there rightfully, and some of them are there, technically because because they did break the law, but the law itself is very flawed. So our right to vote and have a government that's up by and for the people really relies on everybody being able to vote, even if they're currently serving time.
Am I just going to go down the road?
We're just going to take control, Sneaka, don't mind.
I've got that koosh ball I throw at my grad students to make them answer questions. Sorry.
I would definitely be in favor of restoring voting rights. I would be concerned about extending that to people who are currently incarcerated, just knowing that there could be some coercion that would happen from the guards and people who are in a position of power over them. So it was something I would want to investigate further before I would do that. But for sure, once they're out of prison, why should other people not have as much of a voice about what's happening in their world as those who weren't caught doing something?
Whether you're incarcerated or on parole or free, it's still a human right in this country to vote. And when you are affected by the laws that policymakers are imposing on you, you absolutely should have the right to vote. Those who are victimized sometimes by the law know best why they should vote certain ways. So we should trust that. So just a couple things though I want to add to this whole discussion is that, because it does just suddenly hit me or reminded me of back in 1973, I believe it was, and I cannot remember the gentleman's name, but I have it on my computer somewhere that I've saved this video of this.
There was no computers then.
No, it wasn't a computer then, but there was video. And he spoke before, this is a person who who's responsible for founding a couple of the most conservative think tanks in America. And he spoke before a crowd saying, the fewer people who vote, the better off we are. And that was their goal for the last 45 years, is to ensure the fewer people who vote. And then the last thing is on this particular subject, one of the most corrupt parts of gerrymandering is that people in prison are counted in the census and then included in gerrymandered districts, but then not able to vote. So the power is held by people who aren't even getting full vote out there because they've gerrymandered around prisons.
What a nice segue to gerrymandering. So I'm trying to, as the social studies teacher, play the devil's advocate. Besides disenfranchising people, why wouldn't people who have been convicted of a felony, who have now served their time, not be entitled to vote? And I actually think that voting is more than a right; it's a responsibility. I think that we all owe it to our communities to be informed and to take advantage of that. So as far as people who have served time, I think it's just another piece to integrate people back into society. And because I agree that it shouldn't be a punitive system, it should be a correctional system. But to go back to gerrymandering, since I didn't have a chance to talk about Nick's question, I wholeheartedly agree with Jodi that I really would have liked ranked voting in the Democratic gubernatorial primary. But as far as the low voter turnout, what I hear from people who may not be as committed to vote is they feel like they don't have a voice. And so the intentionality of disenfranchising different groups, we need to remove that, that barrier to people thinking that they don't have a voice. And so I think the money in politics, as Jeff talked about, and the gerrymandering are absolutely key to making people actually have an impact on elections. So if you know that your district, so whether it's your city council district or your assembly district or your congressional district actually is in play, you're much more likely to participate in the process. And if you think it's predetermined, why bother? So I think that fixing gerrymandering and money in politics would be are really the crux of fixing our voting systems.
I apologize, Candidate Johnson. I didn't know that you wanted in on that question.
Sure.
Y'all wave a hand at me next time.
Right. So, just to bridge off from the previous speaker, I know when it came to ranked choice voting and other solutions to voting, one of the main apprehensions was confusing voters. However, there are sunshine laws that we can strengthen to better inform our public, and that would require our government and our leaderships within legislature to ensure that our public and our constituents knew exactly what was happening. And if they didn't, that would be at the fault of our legislature. So coercion was another thing that was mentioned when it came to prisoners' rights. And you know, I support restoring voters' rights. Prisoners' rights have been consistently fought by a movement, and this movement has been hard at work for a very long time, much like the suffragette movement that we heard earlier. Some may think it's slowed in recent years. I just think it's gone to the back burner of the dominant discourse within our country. So this fight started with restored access to government with the First Amendment. Cruel and unusual punishment was outlined within the 8th Amendment of our Constitution. That paved the way for the fall of corporal punishment, which would alleviate some of the concerns for coercion in 1968, and that was after Jackson v. Bishop. Access to health care for prisoners, again, rights that were fought for were solidified in 1976 with Estelle Gamble. In 2005, racial segregation was tackled, maybe not as best as some would like, but it was addressed. And we are moving forward with a standard of strict scrutiny within our prison system to maintain that standard of 2005. And recently, within the last 3 years, in 2015, we saw religious freedoms being upheld in Holt v. Hobbs. You see all these freedoms within our Constitution being afforded to prisoners after they seek out justice through the legal system. It is important for our legislature to be proactive and not put undue pressure on our citizens to fight for our rights. And I have to maybe clarify, in our country, for better or for worse, our Constitution mandates that voting is the right of our citizens. Unfortunately, for better or for worse, it is not a human right. It is a right that's only afforded to our citizens, and those citizens include our prison population. And I would like to end by encouraging all of us to consider that in 2001, the National Commission on Federal Election Reform recommended that all states, not just some, all states, including Wisconsin, allow felons to regain their rights after having completed their sentence. It's also important to note that about 4 million US citizens cannot vote due to past felonies. That is a disenfranchisement that is unacceptable in a nation who claims to be the leader of the free world. We need to abide by the words that we speak and not just believe in them. Of these ex-felons, a large majority are poor, and as we heard from previous speakers, disproportionately people of color. So again, yes, voters' rights must be restored to all people who are US citizens in accordance with Amendment, I believe 15, Section 1. Please correct me if I'm wrong, which was ratified by all of our states in 1870. Thank you.
I vote yes. And we can move on.
Okay. I will say that for some further information on this, please refer to the ACLU Smart Justice Initiative, which is pushing for re-enfranchisement, but it's also attacking the over-regulation of petty issues. For instance, in some states, a first-time graffiti conviction is a felony. There's a number of violations that are petty, that you would think were petty, and they are felonies, and they remove your right to vote. And in some places that includes getting in a fight with a bar, and getting in a fight any bar. So it's a Wisconsin tradition and a Louisiana one. So the Smart Justice Initiative is on the National ACLU website. And I'd say, please look at that. Is Ms. Hagan here? Yes. Do you remember your question, or do I?
Well, you know, it was pretty lengthy, so I'm going
that. But I would like to give a little history as well. So my name is Lori Hagan. I am a city letter carrier, and so my question is going to be regarding vote by mail. Currently there are 3 states that vote by mail, and those 3 states rank among the best in our nation in terms of cost effectiveness, voter participation, and integrity. Earlier, I know Bill brought up the issue of access. We all know what the weather was like tonight. And also you brought up the little ladies in the voting stations. So anyway, my question is, I believe that voter registration is obviously essential. And yet, in the 2016 election, 42% of Americans eligible to vote did not vote. And I believe, and many of them cited reasons that could easily be eliminated if vote by mail was implemented. So I guess I'm asking what your thoughts are, or if you would be interested in pursuing vote by mail in conjunction with voter registration. Thank you.
I'm just going to start on this side.
Thanks for the question, Lori.
You and come this way.
Yes, absolutely. I think vote by mail has proven to be very effective at increasing voter turnout and voter participation, but not only that, I think it's cost effective. And if we can do things that not only save taxpayers money, but also increase participation in our democracy, I don't find any reason why we should obstruct that. And I would full-hearted support of vote by mail.
Thanks for the question. It sounds like a wonderful idea to me as well, and I think it could also serve as a helpful thing for the Postal Service because they are maligned by people who want to privatize everything. It could be another thing to proudly promote with the Postal Service. And you know, I think all these ideas, the ranked choice voting, the automatic voter registration, and eliminating or making it, you know, issuing IDs in a different way, or making the stipulations to vote a lot easier, would just come to the surface if we were able to pull back the curtain a little bit more about the partisan nature of this. And I know it is talked about, and especially by people in this room, but it's just madness. There's on National Voter Registration Day, the last Tuesday or 2 Tuesdays ago, for those of us who follow social media and are on there, whether we want to be or not, there are the hashtags in National Voter Registration Day, and I perused that a little bit, and I follow all the Wisconsin legislators, and the Republicans were just missing from there. And they actively don't want people to vote, and it's something that we need to spread the message around. I know a lot of us are already doing it, but you know, every one of these things sounds like a wonderful idea, and it's maddening to me that there is one part of the country that literally doesn't want people to vote, and I think it's a great idea.
Can you get Turnbull?
Yeah, I'm really in favor of not reinventing the wheel. If somebody has something that's working, let's just do that. And this does solve a lot of problems at the same time too. It's a great idea.
One of the great things about being a candidate is you get hit by all these different ideas that you didn't know about 6 months ago, a year ago, and this is one that came up for me earlier this summer. Somebody asked me about it. I was like, oh, by mail, but you go to the ballot box and you do this, and wow, it was just such a strange idea to me, who's lived in Wisconsin all my life. So, but talking to people who have moved from Oregon and Washington, and they say, it's really cool because you get this whole packet, and it breaks out where each candidate stands on issues, and you can sit down and you can research things. And the part that I love about it is how it's increasing voter knowledge. That you just don't go and say, well, let's see, I had a friend who had that last name, so yeah, I think I'll vote for that person. You actually are researching who you are voting for and what they stand for, and I think that's the important piece of this that we often miss. In addition to, it gets more people involved, it helps the mail service, all these types of things, but it gets knowledgeable people feeling like they're in charge of their government again, and I think that's so critical, so I would definitely be in favor of this.
Thank you. So, this is just another idea that we were working on in my office 9 years ago. And my aide, who worked for me at the time and did all that research for us and put this all together with the help of other aides in other offices, when she left, or when we left our office, she went and got her law degree out in Oregon, and she remains out in Oregon. But when she moved out there, she sent me pictures of, wow, isn't this the great way to go? They actually have boxes, like mailboxes, just for voting ballots, sitting on the corners. That people get their ballot 2 weeks ahead of time. They have lots of time to do, as Jodi mentions, to research their candidates. Doesn't that make sense? And again, the weather can get in the way of elderly or others that might not get to vote that single day they have to vote. And a lot of people like to wait till election day. I do too. I like to go to the voting poll, but someday maybe I won't be able to. But also we don't have the information that we have. And I don't blame voters for being disenfranchised, because the only information they get now is paid advertising that you don't know which one to trust. But when they have the opportunity to actually have it in their hands and realize, oh, there's a referendum question on here, by the way, that is worded so confusing, now maybe I can actually research it and find out what it really means. And it's absolutely the way of the future. We have to do this sort of thing. It's more than just a holiday. We need to have 2 weeks to be able to vote and have this ballot in your hands. I really appreciate that question as well. Thank you, Lori.
Yeah, so it's exciting that other states have gone first, so we can, hope that they've worked out the bugs and learn from them. I agree with Jodi on that. And I too like the ritual of going to the polls on election day, but I'm sure I would get used to it just fine. And Jodi made a comment, I just wanted to comment on about, like voting somebody's name. Hopefully you won't vote for the outlaw on the ballot. But I've had several people say, Wendy, Sue isn't your last name, you should have Johnson on your sign. And it's like, you need to, read it when you're driving by somebody's house. And I've actually had the same people said, well, they'll vote for a Johnson because that's a good Norwegian name. And I thought, oh, don't vote for me because I have a Norwegian last name. That's a terrible reason to vote. So I agree with you on that as well.
Candidate Camacho.
Thank you. So I've also lived in Wisconsin my whole life, and as we've heard previous speakers mention, they have nostalgic memories of going to that ballot stall with their parents in the curtain. And way back when Harrison Elementary in Janesville, Wisconsin had that big lever that made that big cha-ching, as we heard our speaker earlier mention. But the thing is what has been doesn't always have to be. And we've heard this being called the wave of the future. But we've also heard the term, it's nothing new, be used prior to. And I will tell you, voting by mail is nothing new. We may only have 3 states that utilize this and have had success in the past, but there are nations within our country that have utilized this because of the vast, I guess, maybe geographical locations of our constituencies, or maybe even just access to the polls. We all have varying schedules, varying abilities, and we need to ensure that the state specifically, and our best practices regarding voters' rights and access to the ballot. It should not be a hindrance to our agency within our political discourse as citizens. It should strengthen our agency as voters. And as we see it today, it's the former, not the latter, for better or for worse. And so I would definitely advocate, as a candidate right out of the gate, right, for voting by mail.
But I will say this. Voting by mail is not the only tool that we need to approach access to our ballot with. It needs to be an interdisciplinary effort that also utilizes our technology, which would also increase the demand for broadband within our local communities. So with that, I thank you for the question, and I very much support this effort in terms of accessing the ballot.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you for being a mail carrier. I was the daughter of a postmaster and the mother-in-law of a mail carrier. I salute you. This is absolutely something that we should enact as soon as possible. There are people who are receiving their ballots by mail right now. It's not an easy process, and not every community has jumped on the bandwagon. If you live in one of the rural townships that I will hopefully be able to represent, you may not get your ballot by mail, but it's something that we need to make happen. I first experienced this again in 2000, living in Arizona, after I went to the ballot box the first time and realized that they had 7 referendums, each one about a page to read, and you could not very easily ascertain what they meant or what you were voting for. Last year, I know many people who voted incorrectly as far as their desire in trying to keep the treasure in the state of Wisconsin. Had they had that ballot by mail and had a chance to look at it, I think that would have been different for them. So we want to go with this. Thank you.
I will say that, and I'm going to take the next question from the floor, that if you need information about absentee voting, please go to the Chippewa Valley Votes booth, and Mr. Edwardson can talk to you about My Wisconsin Votes and how to request an absentee ballot, especially if you have someone in the armed services, someone who's at a university, or someone who's homebound in your life. I saw hands on the floor, so I got 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's start back here.
Thank you, Dawn Garcia. One of the things that I am most concerned about is our election security. When we get to the polls, it is imperative that our vote actually counts for the candidate of our choice. So I would ask, what is your position? How would you advance election security, understanding that this is something that the state controls?
We should start with candidate Warner, because I've been beating up on this side of the room first.
I believe that one of the advantages of voting by mail would enhance that security, and we don't have to worry about the computer problems with that. So that's one step. I need to study it more to ensure that. Having been a poll worker over the years in many different locations, I never had a fear of that until this last election. So it's a new issue, I believe, in our area that we all need to look at, and again, I'm going to go back to vote by mail.
Okay, thank you for your question. And when it comes to security, I think one of the first things that come to mind in terms of hot button words or phrases is voter fraud. And when you look at the facts and actually do research, even if you spend just maybe an hour, hour and a half on the internet and really seek out reputable sources, sources that have been peer-reviewed, reputable news outlets, many of our local libraries and our university, I'm sure, can refer you to a guideline that will lay that out for anyone that you work with that may be younger, so that you can also guide them in their research. But voter fraud, according to the Brennan Center seminal report, it's titled, "The Truth About Voter Fraud Conclusively Demonstrated Most Allegations of Fraud Turned Out to Be Baseless," and that is a quote. And that of a few allegations remaining, most reveal election irregularities and other forms of election misconduct, and numerous other studies. So not just this study, but numerous other studies have echoed the same result. So when the center debunked our current president's claim that millions improperly voted in 2016, I think within the political discourse that was widely overlooked because I don't see anyone citing this study or others like it very often. However, in any case, voter fraud is unacceptable. However, if it occurs, we do need a nonpartisan elections commission or a nonpartisan equivalent to address claims and concerns here in Wisconsin, and currently that is something that we do not have. Thank you.
Kennedy Johnson.
I don't think of voter fraud when I hear security. I think of Russian hacking, right? So, and that's what came to mind when we're talking, talking about mail versus, versus electronic. And so, as long as we're voting in person, I always choose the paper option. And with Charlie, I'm skeptical about technology. Maybe because I'm Generation X, I don't really understand, how technology works. We had this conversation today, so. Obviously, I don't think as a candidate that I can offer specific solutions to, prevent hacking. We obviously need to empower our experts to keep our systems safe.
Yes, it's, I think what we're talking about is not voter fraud, we're talking about election fraud, which could be real. There was, several years ago, a congressional hearing on this matter, and they actually had persons who programmed these machines testify how easily they could manipulate the machines to change votes. That's election fraud. That's the security we have to worry about. And before that, I actually was an advocate for, we got to move to electronic voting, we got to move to internet, and it made me very nervous about that, and I too started to just ask for paper ballot and advise other people to just, until we get this figured out, how we can actually get in our hands the, for certain, security of electronic voting. I think we have to be very careful and still recommend to people that they use paper ballots. That's, at this moment, that's what we have to do. But on the other hand, once we have something that works, it needs to be the same machines, the same system. It needs to be nationally something that we all can rely on, and it is checked and verified by an agency. I agree with that. And we actually once did have, up until about 7 or 8 years ago, a government accountability board that was nonpartisan, which is one of the first things that I was able to vote on and create when I got into office, and I was fortunate to be able to do that. But now it's gone, and we need that to come back to be returned to us as well.
Candidate Emerson.
I think it's important that no matter how we're voting, there's a paper trail with it. And so whether it's a touch screen that prints something out afterwards that you can verify that that's what you wanted, or whether it's the Scantron ballots where you fill in the blank, something like that where there is a paper trail. Obviously, I'm a little bit of a political junkie if I'm running for office, and so to relax at night after canvassing and whatever, I tend to watch all these shows on Netflix like Scandal and House of Cards and whatever. I don't. Exactly, to relax. But one of them, and I can't remember which one, they had in the early season where they programmed it to literally flip one county in one state, and that got somebody the presidency. And so that just Scandal. Yeah, it just blew my mind that yes, this is hacking at its lowest level, really. And so I think that's where sometimes we say, let's upgrade, let's do, online balloting from home or self-service voting or whatever. And first of all, we need to remember that not everybody has a computer at their house that they can vote on, not everybody has broadband, not everybody has all the advantages that most of us in this room have. And second of all, that can easily be adapted. That can easily have somebody interfere with what our intentions are. So I think no matter which way we go, having that paper trail where we can recount is always the critical piece.
Hold on. I've got 3 more candidates, and I will put you in line. I'm afraid there's a few more questions in front of you. Is that all right?
I'll try to help you not have to wait that much longer. And This has been a great summary of all the things that are important in election security, and definitely a paper trail. The Government Accountability Board thing, that just like really boils my blood. That was, you know, when I was figuring out how to run for office, I was like, seriously, we have 2 separate offices now that don't talk to each other that we have to work with. That's, but you know, having the Government Accountability Board be involved in that, a paper trail, voting by mail, as soon as humanly possible, all of that is key. As a scientist, I'm way too familiar with how easy it is to use computers to do lots of crazy things.
Yeah, you know, it's obviously a big topic these days, and I think due to the partisan nature of everything in the entire country, a lot of our representatives at the national and state level can't see past the next election, and so I think relatively quickly after we passed the massive increase in the military budget, all sorts of senators in the national level, including our male senator from this state, talked about how we didn't need to increase any funding for election security. And in Wisconsin, sort of as an outcropping of the GAB dissolvement, just at the end of that session, they went after a couple people who work at the Elections Commission, and I don't know, I'm certain that everybody here who has filed nomination papers, it's a wonderful group of people who are incredibly helpful at that place. I couldn't believe it. And they are real patriots trying to increase people voting and make sure it's done right. And so I think we need to make sure that we have trust in those institutions, and to see a partisan witch hunt into the Elections Commission. And I saw people online discussing it when I posted an article about it and say, well, maybe it's time for it to roll. It's madness. And we need to make sure that we, as candidates and as citizens, kind of bolster the trust of those institutions.
Yes, I agree that having a paper trail does help, and I think that there are a lot of states who have gone to fully automated online voting machines, which do have their advantages. For instance, you know, in Pennsylvania, you get badgered by this machine if you don't vote all the way down the ticket. And as somebody who's at the bottom of a ticket, it's something I do care about quite a bit. So I think there are advantages, but we need to make sure that we have the resources and the expertise. And one of the things that I think wasn't mentioned here was supporting our municipalities, our local clerk of courts. They have a lot on their shoulders, and I don't think they always have the resources or the support from the state. That means that they need to help them identify crises, help them identify potential hacking, train them on how to keep an eye out for things like this, because those folks have a lot of responsibility and they need resources, they need support from the state.
I'm going to plug the journal, the International Journal of Cybersecurity for you, and you can access that through the guest access at UW-Madison, UW-Eau Claire, or the Moore system at the L.A. Phillips Library. And they have a number of peer-reviewed articles that are on election security right now.
Became one is because I used to live out in the country, and I went to a little bitty place to vote, and it was so handy and everything. And then I went, now I'm living in an independent living for old people. Somehow they let me out. And so I went over to vote at the university, and I used to work at the university, so I know where I am, but you know, it was kind of long and hard and to get up everything. And so I was up there, and I voted, and the woman that was working there said, would you like to use absentee voting? She said, I think that would be really good for you. And you know, I hadn't really thought about it, but it has been wonderful for me. And I just want to tell you that there are a lot of people that vote that way. In this place where I live, you know, lots of other people like I am, and you have to have someone else sign it. So it's really easy, you just run next door and say, could you sign my absentee ballot? So it is a great way, and I think to let people know more about how easy it is, really. It's not good. It's not that easy in a way because you have to register. But the thing is, I was already registered, and so with her telling me and suggesting it, it was wonderful. So I just wanted to tell you that it's a wonderful thing, and really back up anything that can help absentee balloting. Super. You don't need to comment on that.
Thank you.
Can I quick add a response to that, though?
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for that comment. And the one thing I wanted to add to that was that I've been, as part of this process, I've reached out to every assisted living facility and nursing home and anything in my district where folks tend to be confined to the building. And you know, I offered to come and talk with folks because they don't often get the opportunity to come to these public events. And some have been really successful. I'm going to the Wisconsin Veterans Home very soon here. But a couple of the facilities actually called me back and they said, are you the person who brings around absentee ballots and helps people vote? We don't know how to go about doing that, and you know, I just started my job here and they don't know how to register people. And it's shocking how, you know, very few people who, you know, are in the point in time in their life where they need an absentee ballot don't get access to it yet. So there's a lot more that needs to be done, but I agree it's an incredible way to vote. So.
Well, the other thing I would say is that they send the ballots quite early. In fact, that in a way is sort of a problem because I remember I kept thinking, well, I better do my absentee balloting. And it was very close. I think you have to have it by like the Friday after the Tuesday or something like that. But it was, but now I make a point of getting done earlier. But because it comes so early, it's sort of loose. So I think you need to remember that you do have to remember that you have it. But they give it far enough ahead that you can, you know, research things real well. I really like it.
Does anyone else want to respond, or shall we move to the next question?
I'll just say, as I'm sitting here listening to this, it occurs to me this is going to be increasingly important for us as time goes on with our population getting older. So something to make sure we're thinking about.
The good thing about being old.
Well, I'm just getting old.
I think we'll move on.
My name is Barb. I live in Lafayette Township. I want to put a plug in for something Bill said. I've been writing to U.S. senators for decades, so this is how old I am. Proxmire, Gaylord Nelson, Russ Feingold, to get either a federal holiday for voting, and including the midterms, not every single spring election, whatever, but the midterms and the presidential, obviously I got nowhere. I would like to see far less confusion. I've been knocking on doors in 4 different districts in this area, and a lot of people are quite confused about the whole early voting thing. And I'll just give you one example. In Lafayette Township, the ballots were in, and people have been early voting since October 1st, so for a week from today. In the city of Chippewa Falls, when I was doing doors, I shouldn't say this, but I'll say it for Wren. Anyway, there was an 80-year-old woman who had her absentee ballot sent to her home, and she already voted. There were other people who did not know that the ballots were in, and when I talked to the city clerk, she said they were not advertising it, and that officially in the city of Chippewa Falls, that early voting starts on October 22nd, which I assume is approximately the 2 weeks before. In the town of Lafayette, where I live, the town hall is never open on Friday. Where my mom lives, who's 97, and likes to vote on election day. She's been a poll worker for decades. She's now a dependent on a ride. She lives out in the country in an extremely conservative area of Washington County. And I have a sister with cerebral palsy that also prefers voting on election day. The problem, if that is not a national holiday, or at minimum, move to Saturday and Sunday around election time. But anyway, I would like people running for office to support standardizing early voting in the state of Wisconsin. I would like to see at least 3 weeks ahead of time, because one of the districts in this area, the voters were told October 15th. Some have been voting since October 1st, and some of them, it's officially October 22nd. It adds to the general confusion. So my question is about that, is to have legislation to at least standardize early voting in the state of Wisconsin.
I will back you up on that. We are just trying to strategize a little bit, like how to promote the campaign, and some of that depends on when early voting starts. And so the question was, when does early voting start? And the answer was all over the place. So I completely agree with you. That should not be confusing.
Yes.
Well, I'm going to add, this isn't new, but I just saw this happen again. And every time this happens, every election cycle, it's in the news like, oh my God, they made a mistake, and this is something that's, I'd like to see us pass a law that makes it a felony even to do this, to deceive people this way, because there's groups in this country and in this state who send out these application for absentee ballots with including the wrong clerk address for them to send it back to. So people don't get their vote counted and don't get their real absentee ballot. That is the most devious, cynical, awful thing that happens every cycle, and I don't ever see anyone prosecuted for it, and that needs to be prosecuted.
Kennedy Camacho and then Kennedy Warner.
I thank you for bringing this up because it's imperative that we ensure that our constituents know exactly which dates things are due. You've heard that there are candidates up here of the legal profession, and as a hopeful lawyer someday, we know that there are due dates. And if you miss those due dates, you're putting your client up a creek without a paddle. And we cannot do that to our citizens. The other thing is if you're not familiar with the Green Party, one of our platform stances is making our election day for president and midterms a holiday. So people are mandated that they'll get off, and the people who are of the working class, if it is a holiday, they get holiday pay. So they don't miss out on work. A lot of times you'll see that people within lower socioeconomic jobs cannot afford to just leave work. They want to go vote, but years working as a manager in retail, I never broke $10 an hour, and I needed every cent to make ends meet. I was surviving, not thriving, and we need to ensure our voters are thriving. Thank you.
Kennedy Warner.
I'm a yes also.
I thought I saw a couple of other hands. And this way.
Now this is going to be a very brief question directed at Wendy Sue Johnson. What are the chances for the new Gill v. Whitford to prevail given the newest justice sitting in Kennedy's seat?
So we had hoped that Kennedy would be, the efficiency gap measure of packing and cracking was targeted to Kennedy as kind of the swing vote in the last major case before the court. But, kind of going into the Supreme Court argument, we had hoped perhaps to pick up Roberts as well. But the decision that we got was unanimous that we hadn't met standing. In other words, it was going back to the trial court. All of them agreed to do that. And it seemed, we can guess what they're thinking, nobody knows for sure, but only 2 justices said they would throw it out altogether based on standing and end the case. And so that means 2 conservative justices voted to allow us the chance to make the argument. And so that leaves the door open. If they had wanted to get rid of it, we would have expected at least a 5-4 vote with Kennedy on our side to keep the case going, and 4 of them just saying no, end the case now. So we still have Roberts and Alito who have left the door open. And so I don't think that this justice is the key. If this had happened prior to the first trip to the Supreme Court, maybe. But 2 conservative justices have left the door open for us to come back again. So I think it's just fine. Of course, Merrick Garland should have been there instead of Gorsuch anyway, but there's still hope.
Questions?
Can I just ask a question or / comment
Yeah, go
about that
ahead.
too? The other piece of it that, now this case is specifically about the current maps that are in Wisconsin, right? So if, say we were to have a mini takeover in Madison and we're able to get nonpartisan redistricting passed, we wouldn't have to continue with this case. To some extent, correct? Or
Yes
no?
and no.
Okay, thank you.
So if other people are interested, I'll answer that, otherwise I can tell Jodi.
No, go ahead and let's answer.
So the case is about the map, the current map, the result, and challenging the standards on which it was drawn. And so the hope, you know, of course had been before this election, but we still have another election in 2020. And more critical even, because those people then will do the redraw or decide how that process will happen after the next census, so in 2021. And even if we're successful in our lawsuit, it only changes the current map that will, you know, be in place for the 2020 election, not what is drawn in 2021. It could create standards for 2021. But the process by which maps are drawn, currently, or at least this last map, in a secret map room across the street where you only saw your district when you signed a non-disclosure and only if you were in the Republican Party, and et cetera, et cetera. And so, you know, when Jeff said he wrote this bill, I'm going to guess that Jeff himself didn't write all 70-some pages, that he actually relied on
I mentioned staff.
Some staff, some people down in the basement with law degrees that are actually doing some of the actual work. So it's Jeff's idea and he's advocating for it, but you've got experts writing the actual law, and that's what the nonpartisan process is about, like Iowa and other states where you've got, you know, you could actually have a computer do it now and spit out hundreds and thousands of maps that are not biased. So the process could change. And yes, I think if we get the governor and pick up enough seats in either house, we could force the compromise, or at least, you know, scare them enough to say, oh boy, a nonpartisan process would be better than letting Democrats have revenge in 2021.
Candidate Keturi.
I just want to make a quick comment. I think nonpartisan redistricting and following the legal process is really important, but it's important to mention that we can't rely on that. We have a really good example of Patty Shockner, who flipped a very, very, very red seat, and I have to believe that every single person here is committed to making sure that you vote, your neighbors vote, your friends vote, and I have to believe that we can do this regardless of what district we're in, just so I can get through the next couple of weeks, but also just for our, you know, for the sake of our future, right? We need to make sure that we are pushing in every space possible. That includes at the ballot box, that includes whether you're, you know, holding a protest at your local town hall or at the school board or in your workplace or with your family, that you are getting folks to the ballots. That is crucial. So do that.
Candidate Johnson, correct me if I'm wrong, but racial gerrymandering has already been declared illegal by the Supreme Court. So really this is taking the question of gerrymander and it's basing it off of that precedent with racial gerrymandering being illegal to say that partisan gerrymandering is also illegal along the same lines. That is the argument that you're making.
Yeah, it's similar except that race is a protected class, and so, you know, when you have more protections if you're being discriminated against by race than if you're being discriminated against because you're a Democrat.
I'm wondering if I could comment on that.
Okay, so candidate Camacho, candidate Smith, and then I have a question from the floor.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if you saw me over here, but
wave big.
Next time. So I would love to say that the Supreme Court and our judicial system is the answer to all of our problems, but there is a reason why we have a checks and balance, right? We have the three structures, or our three sections of government that maintain a checks and balance. And our biggest role is voting. That ballot box is going to maintain who's in our legislature, who's in our executive office, and then who makes the appointments. Our appointments are huge. We've spent a lot of time paying attention to Justice Kavanaugh and his hearings. But what about all the other justices who've been appointed during the last 2 years? We must not allow ourselves to be blinded by the dominant discourse. And we have to remember our history. History is pivotal in maintaining a healthy and sustainable society. And when we look at our history as a nation, you'll see that two parties have dominated our political discourse for decades. So gerrymandering is nothing new. Gerrymandering has been imparted and used, for better or for worse, by both major parties in power today. So we need to really think about this. If we have concerns about Gill v. Whitford, if we have concerns about voter gerrymandering, we need more diverse perspectives at the table, because right now we have two factions pulling the strings. And one may say they're two wings of the same bird, but then we look at nature, right? We live in a beautiful section of our state, and we look at the sky and we see birds. Most generally, they're not flying alone. They're flying in a flock. And at times, that head bird, they get tired, they get hurt, and they need to step aside. And they need to allow the next bird to take over, and it needs to be cyclical, because our strength is in our collective, not just two parties. Thank you.
Candidate Smith.
So I am, by the way, I like to say this when I can, because when I was chair of that committee, I'm still, my name is still dropped by leaders of this lawsuit as the only legislator who actually had a hearing on redistricting reform, because it is a two-party problem. But I was the one who held a hearing and tried to force it onto the floor back in 2010. Didn't happen. Hopefully lessons have been learned. And I just want to remind all of you, though, if you aren't aware, that if you live in Eau Claire County, you actually have it on the ballot this fall. You have the ability to actually advise this legislature that this must happen. So you don't forget that, and you need to talk to your friends. And by the way, we have signs at 440 Broadway Street you can put in your yard advocating for fair maps before this election. So keep that in mind. This is such an important issue. This may be the most important issue that we face right now politically in this country and in this state. So take that up. And by the way, and I agree with Wren, I'm really glad you brought that up. Gerrymandering wouldn't happen, or wouldn't help, or wouldn't work if voters didn't let it. So we have to keep working towards the idea that we can change people's minds and get people to start paying attention and do the right thing.
Question.
So everybody here has pledged support for automatic voter registration, but like Jeff said, it's not a new idea in Wisconsin. Jeff made an attempt in 2015, another attempt was made. That failed. 2017, another attempt was made. That failed. But in other states like Illinois, automatic voter registration has passed with very robust bipartisan support. So my question to you is, if you carry the torch of automatic voter registration into the legislature, what are you going to do to get both parties to support the bill and build those bridges and consensus to make sure it actually passes?
Candidate Warden.
The beauty of that opportunity is that it gives us the opportunity to really work on building consensus and to start with that. I think that if there is a big change in the elections this fall, that a lot of the people that might win, because we all know that elections are kind of stacked for the incumbent. They generally are, and we have a lot of challengers who want to take over that spot, and some will prevail, some will not. They'll come back. But that becomes a rallying cry that I think is easier to sell to our opponents than some. And I think that gives us the perfect start. And making it reasonable, and we'll have to lay it out there that it's going to happen and they should be on board.
So as we heard earlier, our Constitution was deliberately written the way it was, to complete a design. Partisan politics have made strides in recent history to perhaps make the access to government and the words of our founding fathers be more equitable to all of our citizens. And I'm grateful for that. You know, I'm a young voter, I'm a young community member, I'm 33 years old. But what I've witnessed in my voting lifetime, right, is that, again, a binary of political discourse has perpetuated this reality. The only way to challenge that binary conversation is to add another voice, to add diversity to the legislature, whether that be gender diversity, whether that be demographic diversity. There needs to be more voices at the table that represent the many. So when we really think about what can be done, we need to be electing people who are willing to understand that extremism doesn't work. It's not one way or another, it's somewhere in the middle. The answer is in the collective. But I very much want to state that if we don't end our pattern of behavior within voting, we're only going to maintain this insanity of our political system, right? Science teaches us that participating in the same action over and over and over, producing the same result, but expecting different results is insanity. We need to stop that. We are the leader of the free world. We cannot be operating in such a manner, and we have a responsibility to fix that system. If we bring more voices, it'll strengthen the diversity. Science also teaches us the greater the diversity, the greater the fitness, and we need a fitter legislature.
Candidate Johnson.
Yeah, so the essence of gerrymandering, it's an entrenchment of people in power. And so, you know, I didn't want to suggest that we don't need to vote, because we absolutely need to, you know, to bring new voices down to Madison to make a change. We need new people down there. But when we have an entrenchment of people in power, they don't need to listen. And so you know, some of our opponents, you know, well, they're not here, but they don't necessarily want to listen at, you know, listening sessions and those sorts of things. They're entrenched. And so, you know, when we have, you know, competitive elections and elections that make changes, that forces people to talk to one another. And I was actually encouraged that Republican Bob Culp, who is in the Neillsville area, came out in a chamber, Eggs and Issues, and said, I actually think this is a nonpartisan issue, that we should have a nonpartisan, you know, redistricting process. Representatives shouldn't choose their voters, voters should choose their representatives. And so before he knew I was running, you know, we exchanged, you know, business cards, and he sends me an email, says, you know, let me know if I can help you out with anything down at the state. And I emailed him back and I said, you can work with me across the aisle. And then he Googled and found out I was running because he was on vacation. But so I think there are good people, you know, in all parties, and that once that entrenchment is broken and we make gains, that there will be more bipartisanship.
Well, first of all, I wish we had already been putting out a pledge sheet to all candidates, trying to get that pledge. And I know you did for automatic voter registration, right? And I wish we had done that for gerrymandering as well. But I haven't seen, is it now?
Yep, I got one last week.
All right, that's good, because it's similar to, you know, that pledge that some people take to never raise a tax. We need to get there, we need to get practically in blood that this is what you'll support. And we need to do it before they're elected. Because once they're elected, you see a lot of things change when they get into office and their attitudes change. So that's important. But for me personally, Bill, I would tell you that I have the experience to have worked with both sides. When I was the chair of a committee, I took that responsibility very seriously. And that I understood that I had been in the minority before I was in the majority. And I knew what it felt like. So that when we got a bill, or I wrote a bill, or we introduced something in my committee, I didn't spring it on anybody. I actually contacted the members of my committee from the other side of the aisle first, and had individual meetings with them to make sure they knew what we had and what we were introducing, and tried to get their ideas and thoughts on it beforehand. And that was a way of building trust. And I think even to this day, those who served with me that were Republican back then would say that I was the one they really felt the most trust for. And that's how it works, and that's how I would continue to work.
Candidate Emerson.
I would love to say that we could work together on this issue, but I think the people who aren't at this table says that there's certain people who don't care about it. They don't want to have every voice heard. So I think an important piece would be, and several of us have talked about this, getting one of the first pieces of legislation through is going to be a nonpartisan redistricting, so that the elected official is actually responsible to the people who are voting for them, not to the special interest groups, not to the rest of their party, not to their caucus, that kind of thing. And so that you actually feel like you have an opportunity, once the lines are redrawn, to have a voice to get up and say, you know what, this isn't fair and this isn't how we want it in this area. So that's an important piece of it. And I also think along those lines, we need to, as citizens, give grace to candidates who are willing to break party lines sometimes. That it's okay to vote with the party most of the time, but if your conscience is saying, you know what, I'm not in favor of this, I'm not in favor of that, we can't lambaste them. We can't, you know, threaten to put a primary candidate up against them. You know, we have to be able to let people vote their conscience, vote what their constituents are saying sometimes, and be able to break party lines sometimes too. And so that's a piece of it as well. We can't always have just one party and the other party. So it's a really important piece as well.
So I don't have the data on this for Wisconsin, but I do know that studies repeatedly show that that a large fraction of voters in the United States they consider themselves independent. They don't, like 40+% of people don't affiliate with one of the two main parties. And I suspect that, I have no reason to think that that is not true in the state of Wisconsin. But we're so fearful of voting for anything other than the lesser evil because we feel our vote is just wasted if we lose, and if we waste it on somebody who's not one of the two main parties. So, you know, we want to keep visualizing, I think, just what it would look like to have independent people in office. And however we get there, whether it's actually electing, you know, getting really smart and organizing now, planning for the 2040 election. I mean, if you look at where the current party is at, the party of power is at, you know, that didn't just happen, like accidentally. They got together, they really organized, they had differences, they worked them out, they spent 20, 30 years figuring out how to get to this point. And that is what we also need to start doing. It's not about, you know, I've been hearing occasionally, you know, when people find out that I'm running as an independent, a lot of people that just like resonates with every fiber in their being, and they're so excited. But a lot of people who, I mean, we're on the same side of all these issues, that it just causes fear. I don't know why certain people react so differently. You know, personally, I don't need ranked choice voting to vote for what I really believe in, but I think that a lot of people really do. And so we have to figure out a way to get there, and we don't have in Wisconsin the ability to pass laws through referendum. Like the state of Maine is now using ranked choice voting for their primaries, and eventually I think the plan is to use it for the general election, which I think is the best political news of the decade. I'm so impressed with that state, and when I was reading about that earlier this year, the first thing I thought was, well, we need to just do what they did, and then I realized that they can actually pass laws through referendum. We can't do that here, which is devastating. but nevertheless, you know, we have to persevere. And so, you know, when I hear people say, "This is the most important election of my life," I just think, really, you know, because. No, didn't we say that 2 years ago? 2 years before that, and 2 years before that, and 2 years. This has always been the most important election of my life. Therefore, I can't take any risks. I have to, you know, I just can't risk allowing, you know, the evil other to be elected. I have to just suck it up and vote for somebody that I don't really like that much, but they're not even close to as bad as the other guy. And that kind of thinking is what keeps us where we are, because actually we're the ones who have all the power. We're the ones who walk into the voting booth, and we're the ones who determine the outcome of every single election. So that, I think, is something that needs to change deeply within our consciousness. We need to sort of reclaim that original pluck that just was like, you know what, this is what is the right thing to do, and I'm just going to do it, even if I'm the only one. And that's what really leads to real change that benefits everybody. So, thanks. So when I think about, when I hear that sort of panicked, really, almost hysterical, like this is the most important election of my life, I want to figure out a way to message to people that it's actually not. I mean, all elections are very important, but what we need to start planning and really thinking about is how to carry out a longer vision so that maybe in 2020 we make a little bit of, just a little dent. Maybe we just kick as big of a dent in the machine as we can right now. And then let's not, actually this is all about November 7th, because on November 7th then we start thinking, about what we're going to do for 2020. And let's all get together, whether we're third party or independent or what, and make a plan for our own, 20-year vision for the state that would get us to where we need to be. And actually think about, what would that look like, and what do we have to do together which parts of the state, can we really work on to start making those inroads.
Candidate Calabrese.
Well, I think all of us up here would, in terms of getting money out of politics, returning representation to citizen legislators is one of our main goals. And I think the byproduct of that would be more civil discourse and an actual measured legislature that is actually just responsive to the people and working for the best interest of everybody. But until then, I don't think we can have, I don't think we can be naive in thinking that that we know that we are in the right. We know that even if we're not in the majority, that our ideas are better, and so we fall into that trap of the normal things that legislators do. They send out a monthly newsletter. They go in with their caucus and figure out what they're going to say in a press release. And maybe because I wasn't planning on doing this in my life, I'm really looking forward to being in the assembly to use whatever little bully pulpit that there is. And so you think about what speaks to people, independents and conservatives especially, is money issues. And you brought it up, Bill, at the beginning about the difference in the mailers that they sent out as compared to how much ranked choice voting would, with automatic registration would cost. And then you go every day and you call a press conference, and even if only one reporter shows up every day, you say, Representative so-and-so wants to spend more money, and I don't know why. And it seems like he doesn't want his constituents to vote, and I don't know why. And you just beat them with a stick politically over and over again until you reach some sort of civil discourse, because there is no reaching out to their better nature, because they are in severe lockstep in that body, and we need to come together and pound that message home to their constituents. I don't know why your representative doesn't want more people to vote. I don't know why they want to spend more of your money to send out mailers. So you got to go in that direction, I think.
Candidate Keturi.
So one of the things I've been trying to do during this campaign is go to every town board meeting. And that's a big task considering it's a big district, but one of the things that I find so refreshing about being at town board meetings is that folks who I know are ideologically opposed to one another work together spectacularly well. And they sit down together, they fix problems together, they get potholes fixed, they get trees trimmed. I have never once seen a town board representative try to shut down public comments in my district. when they're considering really significant issues. We were talking about this earlier. I was talking with some folks who live in my district earlier about the significant challenges that they face, and they can be in ideological opposition to each other, but they yet still manage to have public discourse about it. They manage to hear one another out, and they manage to solve problems. And when I was realizing this, I was thinking, wow, that is so different from our state house. That's 100% different from how Madison works. And I think John is right that, you know, money has corrupted how people behave when they're lawmakers. And so what you find is that, you know, they will say a lot of things when you're running, and yet act and vote in a completely different way. And I often tell the story of sometimes I have this, when I'm really tired, I have this like fantasy of what it would be like to run like a super high funded corporate PAC dollar campaign. And if I just had somebody who said, here are the talking points, here's what you're gonna do, here's what polling says works, now go do it, and be that cookie cutter candidate. And yet they come knocking on your door the moment you win, right? And but I don't think these people are evil. Let me be very clear about that. My opponent is a very nice man who has a very nice family and has deep roots in his community. And yet, when it comes to representing our constituents, we need to question whether or not the interest is staying in office or if the interest is representing your constituents. And I think that's the choice we're making, as opposed to who's evil and not evil. It's who is going to go and best represent their constituents. And that's why I think things like automatic voter registration, which have a lot of bipartisan support, end up failing. Because once we get folks in office who are bought and paid for before they get into office, they just do what the special interest groups and the people who paid for their campaign tell them to do. And I think that that's really what has corrupted this entire process and what I'd like to see change in our state house.
And it is 8 after 8, so I'm going to ask the candidates if you'd be willing to give it 1 minute apiece of your closings. And what I'll do is I'll be sitting here and I'll be doing 2, 1, 0, so everyone can see me. Candidate Keturi or Candidate Warner, which side shall I start from?
I'm okay starting. I'm hungry too, so please keep me. I'm gonna eat dinner tonight. So, thank you all so much for being here tonight. I know it's rainy and crappy weather, but I think one thing that is so hopeful to me is to see folks who are active and engaged in their community. And I'm not talking about every 2 years or 30 days before Election Day, although we're knocking doors in Chippewa Falls this weekend if you want to come out. But you need to be active every single day. And I'm sorry to say that because it's exhausting. But folks like Barb, who have seen this happen time and time again, and who we've talked about this before, is sometimes you take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And maybe 1 step forward and 2 steps back, right? But over the long view, and I'd like to think that hopefully I have a long life left to see this happen, knock on wood, you never know. But in the long view, I'm hoping that we can accomplish something that's better, and I think better is good. Better is good. And that's all I'd like to end with. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for having me. It's been a fun evening, and I'm really excited to see people who come out to any of these events, and it's just a wonderful thing. And since I went first at the beginning, I should have told, and my mother would be very upset with me that I didn't, because everybody was telling their youthful voting stories, and I think I'm going to close with that because it's something that we all need to hold tight to when we leave here, because that's the stuff that keeps us inspired and keeps us going every day when we get up and reluctantly look at the news. My mother was the county elections commissioner in Livingston County, New York, which is south of Rochester. And I used to be a runner at an election night where I would take the results written on paper from one township over to the main office and and she taught me how important it was, and she is a staunch Republican, and she still talks to me every day, not every day, a few times a week, and despite her attempting to push me in another direction, I can tell that she's proud of me, and I think it's a good lesson on that, you know, it's not just pie in the sky, we all really are in this together, and it starts with the vote, so thank you.
Well, this has been a real treat, and my favorite part of these forums is how much I learn from everybody else's responses, actually, and actually the questions themselves really caused me to think a lot harder about certain things. You know, had never thought about people living in assisted living facilities or what voting access was like for them, actually, to be honest. So I really appreciated like hearing the two of you talk about that. My candidacy as an independent really is about voting issues. It really, the number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 objectives for me really are establishing, really repairing our election system. And though I am an avid environmentalist and very much in favor of strong schools and really want to see science informing our natural resources policies, all of that to me is, it's more, the problems there are symptomatic of the core issue, which is that we in Wisconsin are some of the most generous people, hardworking people in the nation, and we are able to solve so many problems together at our community levels. And nobody asks, like, well, I'm a Republican, so I'm not going to support the farmers market or something. So we are capable of working together. We do it all the time, and I want to see that same spirit reflected at the state level. We deserve that.
I just want to thank you guys for putting this forum on, for giving us an opportunity to reassure voters that we are going to be here, we are going to listen. Again, I want to point out people who are not here, and let's remember that on election day. But I think it just goes to speak about power and control, and once somebody has power, they don't want to let go, they don't want to give it up. I'm thrilled to be among this group of people who are willing to put their summer and their fall on hold to serve for their fellow neighbors. And you know, just wanted to thank you guys for doing what you're doing. Appreciate it.
I've mentioned it before, but I know that all of you are here because you care as much as we do, and many of you have put in as much hard work and time and effort into trying to make the change that you want to see. Wouldn't it have been great if at least one of our opponents from the Republican side had actually shown up and shown some courage, and what would that have done for them as a person and in their campaign if they had just taken the time to be here tonight? And that makes me very sad that not one of them would do that. And I think it's something that we should remember, but at the same time we need to understand what sort of pressure is being put on some people to not show up. And gerrymandering has a lot to do with that. And as we move on and move forward, and I am fully for automatic voter registration and doing everything in our power to make voting the power that people should be using, gerrymandering has taken hold of our elected officials and taken them away from us. And we need to remember that even more. Thank you.
I can't imagine loving this job enough to want to do it forever. I agree with Jeff that we all need to do our part, and I do think everybody has a responsibility. I said that earlier, and part of the reason I ran is because I thought I had like the personal characteristics to do it. And so they're running these negative television and radio ads and, against me, big dark money groups, and sending these glossy flyers. And I'm kind of amused by that. Like, you must be really afraid to spend all this money to prevent me from beating you in this gerrymandered district. And so I have a pretty thick skin. I don't get upset. Like, my mom's upset, my friends are upset, it's fine. But so at the beginning, we were supposed to tell you about our district. So Jodi has most of the city of Eau Claire, a good South Sider. She's ignoring the North Side, which a big chunks of it belong to me in the 68th. So I have parts of the North Side of Eau Claire, Lake Hallie, the town of Lafayette, basically south of the Yellow River, all the way along 29, not Cadott, but Stanley Boyd, Thorpe, Withy, down to Greenwood, Humbird, so a section of Clark County, the 2 townships in Jackson County that Jeff doesn't have, and Charlie doesn't have, and then Osseo, so a little chunk of Turnbull County, and then Altoona, Falkirk, Augusta, I think I said Fairchild, but I'll say it again. So mostly Eau Claire County and pieces of 4 other counties. And it was gerrymandered, and all of the Democrats were packed into Jodi's district, and I'm not supposed to win it, but I chose not to run in the 91st, I chose to run in the 68th because I'm a North Sider, and I think the 68th belongs to us, and so I moved. I lived on the gerrymandered line. I was packed into the 91st, and I moved. You know, because we've sent our kid to college and it's fine. Because according to our experts, we really do need a tsunami, and hopefully Patty Schechter is, you know, is the bellwether that we are going to do that. You know, but it is an uphill battle, and I think we, you know, need to be realistic about that, and we really do need every single person to vote, because when people vote, Republicans do not win.
In closing, I wanted to thank the organizers of this event. I know putting on any community event is a chore in itself on top of all of the daily chores that we do and work. But I'm thankful that we've had the opportunity to allow this discourse to happen within our community. It is important. It is important to see who's not at the table, but it is just as important, if not more important, to see who's here. See who's willing to answer the questions and speak from their heart. And think, not just believe in what they're saying, but think about what they're saying. Plan. Put planning behind the words. And as we've known, progressive steps are just little small steps at a time. We are at a time in our country where progressive is no longer enough. Progressive values are no longer enough, and as a minority woman in Wisconsin, indigenous, half of me is indigenous, half of me is of European descent, I can tell you that it is not enough. I never want to have a young child go to the polls like I did with my father, who's a veteran, indigenous man, and have him turned away, and have to go home and get multiple pieces of mail. And as a child, feel the embarrassment, not of my father, but of the treatment and the reality of our system. That's why I'm running, to create a more sustainable, healthier, and equitable future. It is imperative we participate in our agency and encourage others to do so as well, no matter who they vote for, because like we heard earlier, it just matters that you vote. And the fitness of our community will increase with the diversity of those who serve in our legislature. So please look at the demographics of your districts. In ours, 50% is female, 50% is male. Right now, besides Kathleen Reinhardt, it is all male representatives and senators. We need help at a legislative level, and the only way to do that is being a courageous voter. Thank you for your time.
It is a very humbling experience to be in a room with people who have come to listen to us speak, who are all concerned about the future of voting in Wisconsin. I can't tell you how much this means to me, because it's something I think about all the time. And through this process, I've learned, well, back in May, I realized that people really didn't want to talk about the November election. It was too far away. But for me, it was the next day. Now we're down to the wire, and every day is a trauma and a drama, and we move forward as best we can. And and hope we don't slip off a wet step that's steep and has no railings, or fall in a sky hole and break your arm. It's been an honor to be at this table with all of these idealists, and we all hope for the future and are glad you're with us. Thank you.
I'd like to ask for one more round of applause for the candidates. Thank you. Can we thank Chippewa Valley Votes and the Human Rights Campaign for putting this on. We have panels, Chippewa Valley Votes, the Human Rights Campaign, and Chippewa Valley Votes automatic voter registration information in the back. Please grab one of these before you're on your way out. I will remind you, October 15th is the last day for self-registration. It's 17th, I'm sorry. October 17th is the last day for registration on My Wisconsin Votes. Please make sure you write something on why you do vote. Thank you for coming to this, and I hope to see you at the polls in November.